The courthouse steps were crowded that morning as Officer James Bradley stood guard during a high-profile corruption case. The spring air was thick with tension as protesters and media gathered outside when he spotted a woman in a simple navy blazer trying to enter through the staff entrance. The morning sun cast long shadows across the granite steps as television crews set up their equipment preparing for another day of explosive testimony in the Johnston County corruption trial that had captured national attention. Officer Bradley had been stationed at this courthouse for 15 years and prided himself on knowing every judge, lawyer, and staff member by face, which is why he felt particularly alert when he noticed the unfamiliar woman approaching confidently through the staff entrance wearing a navy blazer and carrying a sleek leather briefcase, the kind usually reserved for senior partners at law firms. Bradley shifted his weight and adjusted his belt, watching as she navigated through the crowd of reporters with practiced ease. Something about her demeanor caught his attention. She walked with the assurance of someone who belonged there, but in his mind that made her even more suspicious, as his training had taught him that confidence could often mask deception. The morning briefing had specifically warned about potential security threats given the high-stakes nature of the trial, where 3 county commissioners faced charges of embezzling millions in public funds. A crowd of protesters had been growing daily, some carrying signs demanding justice, while others supported the accused commissioners, creating a volatile atmosphere that put all security personnel on edge. Bradley noticed how the woman seemed unfazed by the chaos around her, not even glancing at the shouting protesters or the media circus that had transformed the usually dignified courthouse steps into something resembling a carnival. She moved with purpose, her heels clicking against the polished granite as she made her way toward the restricted entrance, while other staff members rushed past, flashing their badges hurriedly. Bradley observed that she made no move to retrieve any identification. The security protocol had been enhanced for this trial, requiring even longtime employees to display credentials at all times, which made her behavior even more suspicious to him. While maintaining his position, Bradley began to approach the entrance, his hand instinctively resting on his utility belt, as he had been trained to do in potentially confrontational situations. The woman was now just a few feet from the door, her hand reaching for the handle when Bradley decided it was time to intervene. He had seen too many people try to slip through security by acting like they belonged, and he wasn't about to let it happen on his watch, not during the biggest trial of the year. The media presence made him even more determined to demonstrate proper security protocols as cameras continued to roll, capturing every moment of the unfolding scene. Bradley squared his shoulders and prepared to intercept her, confident that he was doing his job, protecting the integrity of the courthouse and ensuring that proper procedures were followed by everyone regardless of their appearance or demeanor. Bradley immediately moved to intercept the woman, his hand raised in a stopping motion as he informed her this entrance was for authorized personnel only. She stood calmly, her briefcase held in one hand while trying to explain she had a meeting inside, but Bradley continued to block her path. His training kicked in as he positioned himself firmly between her and the door, maintaining what he considered a professional yet authoritative stance. The morning sun caught the polished badge on his chest as he squared his shoulders, making his 6'2" frame appear even more imposing. The woman adjusted her grip on her briefcase, maintaining eye contact with a patience that somehow made Bradley more suspicious. In his experience, most people who were caught trying to enter restricted areas showed either nervousness or aggression, but her composure was unwavering. She began speaking in a measured tone, explaining that she was expected inside for an important meeting regarding the case. But Bradley had heard every excuse in the book during his years of service. Her well-tailored blazer and expensive briefcase meant nothing to him, as he had dealt with plenty of well-dressed individuals attempting to slip past security, especially during high-profile cases like this one. He noticed a few heads turning in their direction as bystanders began to take interest in the developing situation, but he remained focused on his duty. The woman reached into her blazer pocket, a movement that would normally put him on high alert, but something in her deliberate slowness kept him from reacting defensively. She seemed to be trying to access what he assumed would be some form of identification, but Bradley had already made up his mind that whatever card or document she might produce wouldn't be sufficient for this entrance. The designated public entrance was clearly marked around the corner, and that was where she needed to go regardless of her claims or credentials. The media crews nearby had begun to swing their cameras in their direction, drawn by any potential drama that might make the morning news more interesting. Bradley could hear the whir of camera lenses focusing and the murmur of reporters speaking into their microphones, but he maintained his professional demeanor as he again firmly explained the proper procedure for entering the courthouse. The woman remained standing her ground, though not in an aggressive way. Her calm persistence only served to reinforce Bradley's determination to handle the situation by the book. He had seen too many security breaches happen because someone decided to make an exception. The growing crowd of onlookers began pulling out their phones, recording the interaction as the woman remained composed despite Bradley's increasingly stern demands that she move to the public entrance or leave the premises entirely. Her patience was evident, even as his tone grew more authoritative. The scene was drawing more attention with each passing moment as courthouse employees paused on their way inside, some whispering among themselves, while others appeared uncomfortable with the unfolding situation. Several members of the press, who had been setting up for the day's proceedings, now turned their professional cameras toward the confrontation, the morning light catching the lens of dozens of phones raised in the air. A young law clerk stopped at the top of the steps, his files clutched to his chest as he watched with growing concern, seeming to recognize something about the woman that Bradley did not. The murmuring of the crowd grew louder as more people gathered, some openly questioning the officer's approach, while others defended his adherence to protocol. A local news reporter had begun narrating the scene into her microphone, describing the standoff between the officer and the well-dressed woman who still maintained her dignified bearing in the face of mounting tension. Bradley felt the weight of the audience's eyes on him, but years of training had taught him to maintain his composure even under scrutiny. He continued to insist that proper procedures must be followed regardless of who the individual claimed to be, though something about the woman's continued patience and the reactions of certain courthouse staff members began to plant a seed of doubt in his mind. A senior attorney hurrying up the steps suddenly stopped short, his eyes widening in recognition, but before he could speak, the woman raised her hand slightly as if to silently ask him not to intervene. The growing audience now formed a loose semicircle around the scene, phones recording every word and gesture, while social media alerts began pinging as the first videos started circulating online. The woman adjusted her stance, but never stepped back or showed any sign of intimidation. Instead, she seemed to be waiting for something, her eyes occasionally glancing toward the main entrance as if expecting someone to arrive. Bradley maintained his position, though his certainty began to waver as he noticed more and more courthouse staff members reacting with surprise and concern to the scene before them. A young legal intern rushing down the steps suddenly stopped dead in her tracks, her eyes widening in recognition as she saw the confrontation unfolding before her. She immediately began running back inside the building while Bradley continued his demands. Sarah Chen had been an intern in the governor's office for exactly 3 months and 2 days, and in that time she had prepared countless briefings, attended numerous meetings, and fetched more coffee than she cared to remember. But nothing in her experience had prepared her for the sight of her boss, the governor of the state, being blocked from entering the courthouse. She nearly dropped the stack of files she was carrying as the reality of the situation hit her. The morning sun caught her badge as she spun around, her sensible shoes squeaking against the polished floor as she rushed back toward the security office, her mind racing with the implications of what she was witnessing. Through the glass doors, she could still see Officer Bradley standing firm, his back straight, his hand still raised in that stopping gesture, while Governor Mitchell maintained her characteristic composure. Chen had witnessed the governor handle difficult situations before, but this was different. This was a demonstration of the varied biases a governor had fought against throughout her career. Other interns and junior staffers watched in confusion as Chen sprinted past them, her cardigan flying behind her as she rounded the corner toward the security office, her heart pounding not from the exercise but from the urgency of the situation. She knew the chief of security would be in his morning briefing, and she had to reach him before this situation escalated any further. The governor's patience was legendary, but Chen had also seen how she could turn these moments into powerful teaching opportunities. The security cameras throughout the building were undoubtedly recording everything, and Chen could already imagine how this footage would be used in future training sessions about bias and assumptions. She burst into the security office, startling the administrative assistant, who looked up from her computer with alarm. Chen tried to catch her breath as she explained the situation, watching the recognition dawn on the assistant's face before she jumped up to get the chief. Meanwhile, outside, Bradley remained unaware of the frantically unfolding events inside the building as he continued to explain courthouse protocol to the woman who would soon be revealed as his state's highest-ranking official. Chen could hear running footsteps behind her as security personnel began mobilizing in response to her news, and she knew that within moments everything would change. The woman reached for her identification just as the courthouse chief of security burst through the doors, his face flushed with embarrassment as he recognized Governor Sarah Mitchell, who had been appointed to oversee the special prosecution of the corruption case. Chief Robert Martinez had spent 25 years in law enforcement and handled countless security situations, but nothing had prepared him for the sight that greeted him through the security cameras moments earlier when Sarah Chen burst into his morning briefing. The feed from the exterior cameras showed his officer unknowingly preventing the state governor from entering the building. Martinez moved with surprising speed for a man of his build, charging down the courthouse corridors with a small entourage of security personnel in his wake, his mind already racing through protocols and procedures that would need to be updated. His badge bounced against his chest as he pushed through the heavy doors into the morning air, where the confrontation had now drawn a significant crowd. Governor Mitchell stood exactly as Chen had described her, calm and composed despite the circumstances, her navy blazer catching the morning light as she finally withdrew her identification, the same identification that would have ended this situation immediately had she not chosen to turn it into a teaching moment. Martinez had attended her inauguration 2 years ago and had personally overseen security for several of her courthouse visits, but today of all days when she had chosen to arrive, without her usual security detail, to observe the corruption proceedings firsthand, they had failed her spectacularly. Bradley turned at the sound of the doors flying open, his face still set in determination, until he saw his supervisor rushing toward them with an expression that made his stomach drop. Governor Mitchell turned slightly to acknowledge the chief's arrival, her expression neutral, but her eyes conveying volumes about the situation they now found themselves in. Martinez began speaking rapidly, apologizing profusely as he reached them, his hands gesturing between Bradley and the governor, while courthouse staff members who had gathered to watch began to whisper among themselves. As understanding rippled through the crowd, the media crews who had been filming the confrontation suddenly surged forward, their cameras focused with renewed intensity as they realized the true identity of the woman being denied entry. Some of the reporters were already speaking rapidly into their microphones, while others fumbled for their phones to call in the developing story. Officer Bradley felt the blood drain from his face as the chief of security rushed to apologize to the governor, while the crowd erupted in a mix of gasps and murmurs. Cameras continued rolling as the scene unfolded, capturing every moment of the officer's realization. The weight of his actions crashed over him in waves as he stood rooted to the spot, his mind racing through every word, every gesture, every moment of the interaction that had just transpired. His hands, which had been so firmly planted on his utility belt, now hung loosely at his sides as he watched Chief Martinez speaking animatedly with Governor Mitchell. The morning sun seemed suddenly too bright, the noise of the crowd too loud, and the weight of his badge too heavy, as the full implications of his actions began to sink in. Bradley had prided himself on his professionalism, his attention to detail, his unwavering dedication to protocol. But now those very qualities had led him to commit what might be the biggest mistake of his career. The media crews that had been filming the confrontation were now positioning themselves for better angles, their cameras catching every subtle change in his expression as the reality of the situation registered on his face. He could hear fragments of their reports already being broadcast live. This is breaking news from the courthouse, where moments ago, Officer James Bradley denied entry to Governor Sarah Mitchell in what appears to be several courthouse employees who had witnessed the exchange were now approaching, some shaking their heads, while others seemed to be hiding slight smiles at the officer's predicament. Bradley noticed Sarah Chen, the intern who had recognized the governor, standing at the top of the steps, clutching her files, and wearing an expression that mixed vindication with sympathy. The governor herself remained surprisingly calm, her posture relaxed as she engaged in conversation with Chief Martinez, while deliberately keeping Bradley within the discussion circle rather than dismissing him outright, as she had every right to do. Bradley could see his fellow officers gathering at the doorway, their faces showing a mix of shock and professional concern, knowing that this incident would likely lead to departmental changes that would affect them all. The morning breeze carried snippets of conversation from the growing crowd as people began to recognize the significance of what they had just witnessed. Phones were raised high in the air, recording every moment, while social media notifications chirped incessantly as the story spread across platforms with lightning speed. Governor Mitchell raised her hand, silencing the growing commotion as she addressed not only Bradley but the gathered crowd, speaking about the importance of questioning assumptions and the ongoing need for awareness in our justice system. Her voice, carried across the courthouse steps with the practiced ease of someone who had spent years in public service. The morning air grew still as people leaned forward, straining to catch every word she spoke about her own journey from a public defender's office to the governor's mansion, and how moments like these, though uncomfortable, were necessary catalysts for change in their society. Her words seemed to cast a spell over the assembled crowd as reporters lowered their microphones, not wanting to miss a single phrase. Bradley stood perfectly still, his earlier embarrassment giving way to a strange sort of awe as the governor transformed what could have been his career-ending mistake into a powerful teaching moment for everyone present. She spoke about the countless times throughout her career when she had been questioned, stopped, redirected, or dismissed because she didn't fit someone's preconceived notion of what authority looked like. Her words resonated with many in the crowd, who nodded in recognition of similar experiences, while others shifted uncomfortably as they confronted their own biases. Chief Martinez watched with growing respect as Governor Mitchell deliberately moved to stand beside Officer Bradley, rather than opposite him. Her body language, including rather than excluding him from the impromptu lesson she was delivering, she spoke about the importance of security protocols and the vital role officers like Bradley played in keeping their institutions safe, while also highlighting the critical need for balance between security and accessibility. The morning sun continued to climb higher in the sky as she addressed the deeper implications of unconscious bias in our systems of justice and the ongoing work needed to create truly equitable institutions. Several young law students who had gathered to watch the day's trial proceedings pulled out their notebooks, scribbling furiously as the governor turned what could have been a scandal into a masterclass on leadership and social justice. Even the most seasoned reporters in the crowd had stopped typing on their phones, captivated by the governor's ability to address the systemic issues at play without diminishing the immediate human elements of the situation. The incident quickly went viral, spreading across social media platforms as news outlets picked up the story, showing clips of the confrontation alongside Governor Mitchell's impressive record of judicial reform and her groundbreaking appointment as the state's first Black female governor. Within hours, the courthouse steps video had been viewed millions of times, trending across every major platform as commentators, analysts, and citizens alike weighed in on its significance. News producers scrambled to put together comprehensive packages about Governor Mitchell's career path, from her childhood in a working-class neighborhood to her graduation from law school with honors to her meteoric rise through state politics. Archive footage showed her earlier experiences with similar assumptions and barriers, including a now infamous incident during her first year as a judge when she was mistaken for a court clerk. 3 separate times in one day, social media influencers began sharing their own similar experiences, creating viral hashtags that trended nationwide as people connected their personal stories to the larger narrative unfolding at the courthouse. Political commentators from across the spectrum found themselves in rare agreement as they discussed the broader implications of the incident, with many praising the governor's handling of the situation, her measured response becoming a case study in crisis management and leadership. Local news stations ran extended segments featuring interviews with courthouse employees who had witnessed the scene, while national networks began picking up the story, framing it within the larger context of ongoing discussions about institutional bias and systemic reform. Governor Mitchell's office released a brief statement acknowledging the incident but focusing on the importance of using such moments as opportunities for growth and understanding rather than division or blame. College professors were already incorporating the video into their law enforcement training curricula, while diversity and inclusion consultants reported a surge in requests for workplace training sessions. The footage itself became a powerful teaching tool, showing both the initial confrontation and the governor's masterful transformation of the moment into a lesson about awareness and change. Major news websites featured side-by-side comparisons of security camera footage and smartphone videos captured by bystanders, providing multiple angles of the incident that would soon become required viewing in implicit bias training sessions across the country. In the following days, the courthouse became a crucible of change as administrators scrambled to address the fallout from the incident, while Officer Bradley found himself at the center of a storm that threatened to reshape his entire career. The morning after the confrontation, Chief Martinez called an emergency meeting of all security personnel, their faces grave as they gathered in the main conference room, where the security footage played on a loop, showing every moment of the interaction from multiple angles. Bradley sat in the front row, his uniform crisp, but his shoulders heavy with the weight of scrutiny as human resources representatives, legal advisors, and sensitivity training consultants cycled through the room, each offering their perspective on what had transpired. The governor's office maintained a calculated silence on the matter, neither condemning nor defending Bradley's actions, which only served to increase speculation among courthouse staff about what consequences might follow. Courthouse employees whispered in break rooms and hallways, their conversations hushing whenever Bradley Bradley passed by while email chains circulated announcing mandatory training sessions that would use the incident as a centerpiece for discussions about implicit bias and institutional authority. The media presence outside the courthouse grew with each passing day, reporters camping out near every entrance hoping to catch anyone who might offer insight into the developing situation. Bradley found himself taking alternate routes to and from work, avoiding the growing crowd of cameras and microphones that seemed to multiply overnight like mushrooms after rain. Chief Martinez worked tirelessly to develop new protocols, his office lights burning late into the evening as he consulted with experts from across the country seeking ways to balance security requirements with respect for authority. Training consultants began developing new materials, their presentations incorporating footage from the incident alongside historical examples of similar confrontations that had led to institutional change. Bradley's colleagues watched him with a mixture of sympathy and unease, knowing that his experience might easily have been their own, while courthouse administrators rushed to implement new identification procedures that would prevent future misunderstandings without compromising security. The meeting between Governor Mitchell and Officer Bradley took place in her private office on a quiet Friday afternoon, away from the prying eyes of the media and the whispers of courthouse staff. The governor's office on the top floor of the state capitol building offered sweeping views of the city below, though Bradley barely noticed the panorama as he sat rigidly in one of the comfortable leather chairs. The governor had deliberately arranged their seating in a conversational circle rather than across her imposing mahogany desk, a subtle choice that spoke volumes about her intentions for this meeting. Bradley had spent hours preparing his statement, rehearsing his apology until the words felt worn and hollow in his mouth. But before he could begin, Governor Mitchell surprised him by asking about his family, his 15 years of service, and what had drawn him to law enforcement in the first place. The tension in his shoulders began to ease slightly as he spoke about his father, a retired firefighter who had taught him the value of public service, and his mother, an emergency room nurse whose dedication to helping others had shaped his own career choice. The governor listened intently, noting how his commitment to protecting others, though admirable, had become tangled with unconscious assumptions that needed to be examined. She shared stories from her early career as a young public defender, when courthouse guards would frequently mistake her for a defendant even after she'd won several high-profile cases. Bradley found himself leaning forward, absorbed in her accounts of navigating spaces where her authority was constantly questioned, even as she rose through the ranks to become a judge, and later a state representative. The afternoon light shifted in the office, casting long shadows as their conversation moved from personal experiences to broader discussions about systemic change. The governor spoke about the delicate balance between maintaining security and recognizing authority, how snap judgments, though sometimes necessary in law enforcement, could also perpetuate harmful biases that undermined the very justice system they sought to protect. The incident became a catalyst for change, leading to a comprehensive review of security procedures at government buildings across the state, while sparking important conversations about implicit bias in law enforcement and public service. Within weeks, task forces had been established in every major city, examining their own protocols and procedures through the lens of equity and inclusion. Bradley found himself unexpectedly at the center of these reforms, his experience becoming a case study in how moments of confrontation could transform into opportunities for institutional growth. The governor's office released a comprehensive report detailing recommendations for security protocol updates that would maintain safety while acknowledging and respecting authority in all its forms. Training programs were redesigned from the ground up, incorporating real-world scenarios and examples drawn from incidents like this one. Security officers across the state participated in workshops where they examined their own assumptions and biases, learning to balance their protected instincts with awareness of unconscious prejudices. Law enforcement academies began updating their curricula to include modules specifically addressing the recognition of authority figures who might not fit traditional expectations. Judges, lawyers, and other court officials from diverse backgrounds came forward, sharing their own experiences with similar assumptions, contributing to a growing database of incidents that would inform future training materials. Bradley himself was invited to speak at several law enforcement conferences, his candid accounts of the incident and its aftermath resonating with officers who recognized their own potential for similar mistakes in their daily duties. Governor Mitchell's office coordinated with security experts, civil rights advocates, and law enforcement leadership to develop new standardized procedures that would be implemented across all state government facilities. The media continued to follow these developments, closely documenting the ripple effects of what had begun as a simple misunderstanding on the courthouse steps. 1 year to the day after the incident, the courthouse steps were once again filled with people. At this time, Officer Bradley stood proudly at attention in his new role as Director of the Institutional Equity and Security Training Program, While Governor Mitchell approached the podium to sign the Institutional Bias Prevention and Security Reform Act, the Morning Sun glinted off the Golden State seal behind the podium as media cameras captured this moment of transformation. Bradley watched the crowd through different eyes, now remembering how exactly 1 year ago his worldview had begun to shift. On these very steps, the legislation represented months of collaborative work between law enforcement, security experts, civil rights advocates, and government officials, all sparked by that single confrontation that could have ended very differently. The governor paused before signing the bill to acknowledge both how far they had come and the work that still lay ahead in creating truly equitable institutions. Bradley found himself standing exactly where he had blocked the governor 1 year ago. But now he was there to protect and support her presence, his new badge catching the sunlight as he surveyed the crowd with a deeper awareness that had been hard-earned through months of training and self-reflection. Chief Martinez stood nearby, beaming with pride as their courthouse was now being hailed as a model for progressive security measures that maintained safety, while acknowledging and respecting diversity in authority. Reporters who had once camped outside hoping to catch Bradley in a moment of disgrace now saw his expertise on implementing institutional change. Their questions focusing on the successful programs he had helped develop and the measurable improvements in security interactions across state facilities. Governor Mitchell concluded the ceremony by shaking Bradley's hand, their public interaction capturing the essence of what their private conversation had begun exactly 1 year before. A moment that had threatened to end his career had instead launched him into a position where he could effect real change in the system he had served for so long.